Hello to all my food warriors. Welcome back to the channel. Coach Joe here, and today we are making a very basic homemade pizza from start to finish. Now, basic doesn't mean that it's not delicious. It is absolutely phenomenal, and I'm telling you, if you follow this recipe, you'll be absolutely impressed with the results. This is just a very basic iteration of pizza, but we can dress this up any number of different ways if we want to get a little bit more creative. But the basic technique, the basic recipe is 100% the same. Could not be simpler. We're going to make our own dough today, and we're going to cook it all the way through to the end product. So every step is going to be captured on this video, so no reason not to be making pizza at home. Couldn't be simpler, couldn't be healthier. Our dough is basically 4 ingredients. We've got flour, water, salt, yeast. That's it. It's the basic foundation of most artisanal breads, artisanal pizza doughs. Couldn't be simpler. There's no reason not to be making pizza at home. I am going to be using a bit of a sweetening agent just to activate the yeast, but really it's not a sufficient quantity to really be considered an ingredient as part of this dough. So really 4 basic ingredients, the classic traditional method. We can use a big stand mixer if we have one available at home. You can use a food processor as well. I like using a stand mixer. I've got one here in the kitchen, and I usually use this when I'm making dough. It's a great time saver, but in the event that you don't have one, we're going to do this the old school way, right? Just the way Nonna used to make it. By hand, in a bowl, on the counter. We're going to knead the dough, and we're going to make enough in this recipe for 2 what we call half sheet pans. So this is a half sheet pan. This is typically what you would have at home to bake in the oven. We're going to make 2 of these. So this way we have enough for 1 meal. This is easily enough for 8 to 10 people. We'll have enough for 1 meal as soon as it comes out of the oven, and then we'll have enough for leftovers for lunches and dinners and whatnot during the week, which is always how we cook intelligently. Cook once, eat multiple times. So we're going to start things off. We have here 800 grams of a good quality organic all-purpose flour. And to that, we're going to add about 50 grams of coarse cornmeal. And the reason why I like to add a little bit of cornmeal to this is it gives it a little bit more interesting texture. When you're eating it, it's a little something extra under the tooth. It gives it a little bit more crunch, a little bit more character in terms of our dough. So I'm going to add my 50 grams of cornmeal in there. To my 800 grams of flour and 50 grams of cornmeal I have here in a measuring cup. This is about 550 mils of, we'll call it tepid to lukewarm water. Really, it's body temperature. If you stick your finger in here, it should feel neither hot nor cold. And to that, I want to add about 10 grams of dry yeast. So what I'm going to do is, before I add my yeast, I am going to add a little bit of agave syrup. Now, usually I add either agave syrup or honey. This is something that just kickstarts the activation of the yeast, so that way as soon as it goes into the flour, it's ready to go. So I'm just going to give that about a tablespoon or 2, nothing more than that. I'm going to mix that up, just give it a quick stir to make sure that it's fully dissolved in the water, and then I'm going to add my yeast directly to that. So I'm just going to give this a quick stir, and literally within a minute or 2 you'll start to see this start to foam and froth at the surface. If that's happening, you know your yeast is active and it's ready to go into your dough. If you don't see any activation at all, it's not foaming, it's not frothing, nothing's happening in your water, it means your yeast is predominantly dead, and you'll want to start that step over again just to make sure that you've got good yeast in the mix. Otherwise, it's not going to allow your dough to rise. So in here we've got our cornmeal and our flour. We're just going to give that a quick mix with a wooden spoon. I'm also going to add my salt to this mixture. This is 2 tablespoons of a fine sea salt. We just want to make sure we add that in and mix it around. We don't want to be adding our yeast directly onto the salt. That salt is going to ultimately kill the yeast if we do that. So we want to make sure it's incorporated into our dough. Give this a good mix. There we are. Now it hasn't even been a minute, and I can see that my yeast, look at that. Let me get my spoon out of the way. It's already starting to bubble up. It's starting to froth on the surface. That means it's starting to eat the sugars. It's waking up. And now when we put this into our flour, this is what's going to cause our dough to rise and give us that fluffy texture that we all love in a good quality pizza dough. So I'm just going to give this one further mix. And then I'm going to add this to our flour. Now this is a fairly, what we call a dough of high hydration. So anything, 60, 70% hydration is going to give us a nice, soft, pillowy dough with 800 grams of flour to start. And yes, we have a little bit of additional cornmeal. Basically at 70% of the amount of flour gives us that 550, 560 mils of water. So we're just going to add this right into our bowl. There we are. Make sure we get everything out of there. Put this off to the side, and we're going to start with a wooden spoon, just mixing all this together. Now this is basically it in terms of the dough. Now we are going to have to work this by hand, but essentially everything that you see in the bowl, these are all the ingredients for our dough. So we're going to give this a mix, have it all come together before we turn it out onto the counter and we start to work this dough by hand. Now you may have to adjust the water slightly depending on the amount of humidity that's in the flour, different times of the year. You know, when we have our winter, typically there's less humidity in the air, which means there's less humidity in the flour. As you make this during the summer months and there's a little bit more humidity in the air, the flour will actually absorb that humidity out of the air into the flour itself. So you may have to add a little bit more water, a little bit more flour, depending on the time of year and depending on how much humidity is actually absorbed into the flour. So this is now starting to come together. What I'm going to do is I'm just going to scrape everything off our wooden spoon here. There we are. There we are. And then we're going to get everything onto a very, very clean countertop. So it goes without saying, my hands are well washed. My counter is well washed. And so we're going to get everything out here just onto our work surface. There we are. All right. So we're just going to get this off our spatula. There we are. Move this off to the side. Get a little bit of flour for dusting and on our hands so the dough doesn't stick. When we're talking about dough of a high hydration, it tends to be a little sticky. It'll stick to your work surface. It'll stick to your hands. What we want to do now is just start to knead this dough and develop the gluten. Now gluten is a protein that exists within flour. By working the dough, we're activating that gluten and it's giving us a good bit of elasticity in the dough. This is what gives the dough its strength. And we want to make sure that we have a good bit of strength in this dough. We are going to allow it to rest as well so that we can ultimately put it into the pan. It'll take its shape. And if you start as you're working the dough, you're finding that it's getting a little bit sticky. Again, we can just add a little bit more flour. Now what I'm doing to work this dough is I'm pulling it back, pushing it onto itself, rotating it again, pulling it back, pushing it onto itself, using the weight in my arms, my shoulders to work that dough. Now we're going to have to do this for a good 10 minutes, just so that we're starting to incorporate all of the flour, the water, the cornmeal, the salt, the yeast all together into one homogeneous dough. But like I said, we want to build out that protein, that gluten. So I'm going to work this for another 8 to 10 minutes and then I'll be right back. All right, we are back. It has been, I'd say a good 10 minutes of kneading. You know that because I'm breaking a sweat here. So you notice as I'm kneading, I'm using the heels of my palm. So I'm not using my fingers to push into the dough. I'm actually using the heels of my palm to just push that out and work the dough, develop the gluten. This dough has now changed texture. It's now come together. So it's hydrated. The flour has started to absorb the water and all of the other ingredients that are in there, the yeast and the salt. So what we're going to do is we're just going to roll this around the board. And what that does, you notice it tightens up that seam on the bottom. So what we want to do is create one dough ball to start. We're going to divide this in two so that we're going to allow our dough to rise separately, pre-portioned. There we are. We'll just give that a quick pinch and move it down. So you notice the dough is not sticking to the board. It's not sticking to my hands. I don't have these big clumps of dough everywhere. So the proportions, I haven't had to add any more flour, any more water to this. The proportions seem to be working well today. So if you do have to add a little bit, don't worry about it. It's common. Everything is a function of how much moisture your flour has absorbed on that specific day. So we're gonna give this just a quick little light pat down. We want this to be one consistent ball. I've got my dough scraper here, and I'm just gonna cut this in half. I'm gonna eyeball that, there we are. And then what I'm gonna do with each of these two halves, I'm just gonna seal up the cut end. Again, just pinch that, flip it over, and give it a little spin on the counter here. What that's gonna do is it's gonna pull the dough, stretch it, make it a little bit tighter, and that way we have one beautifully tight dough ball. We'll put this guy off to the side. Same thing with the other one. Pinch the cut ends over. We'll give them a little scrunch so that they seal that seam. Turn it over. And we're gonna give it a quick rotation on the counter here. So we're gonna make sure that's sealed as well. And it is, there we are. So now we're gonna put these guys side by side. And if they look like they're roughly the same size, you know what? I think we've done our job. So what we're gonna do now is I'm gonna take two bowls, and yes, the bowls are considerably larger than the dough balls, but as you'll notice, as we put the dough in there, it's gonna rise. So we want this dough to rise to at least 2.5, 3 times the size of the original dough ball. So what I'm gonna do to start, I'm gonna take a little bit of olive oil, maybe 2-3 tablespoons, put that at the bottom of my bowl because I don't want my dough to form a skin as it's rising. So what I'm gonna do is I'm gonna take my first dough ball, we're just gonna tighten it up. Now, this top part here is what's gonna be facing up in my bowl. So what I'm gonna do to start is put it face down. I'm gonna swirl it around. This way, I get to spread the olive oil in my bowl all over. And then what I'm gonna do, give it a little flip. Again, make sure the bottom is coated. And I have one dough ball ready to go. I'm gonna take my second one, same thing, put it in face down. Give it a little swirl. Make sure the inside of my bowl is coated with olive oil. Give them a flip. Make sure the underside is coated. And there we are. 2 dough balls ready to rise. What I'm gonna do now is take a little bit of plastic wrap, put this over the top. I'm not gonna seal it 100% sealed because as this rises, it's gonna start to build up some gases inside the bowl, and you don't want, you wanna be able to let those gases escape and let the dough rise naturally by itself. All I wanna do is keep any cold drafts away from the dough, so this dough will rise by itself. I'm gonna give this probably 2-3 hours, and when we come back, we will see our dough that's at least 3 times its current volume. I will see you in about 3 hours. And we are back. It has been probably 3 or 4 hours since we put our dough to rest, and look at these beautiful dough balls. So these are clearly, easily 3+ times as big as when we started. So as you can see, I've just got my plastic wrap just loosely draped over the bowls. I'm gonna remove the plastic wrap now. And this is absolutely gorgeous dough. Now, the time is not all that important. I mean, what you want to do, whether it's 2 hours, 3 hours, 4 hours, it's really the extent of the rise that you're looking for. So what I want is a rise that's somewhere, 3, maybe 3.5 times from the size that I started. And that's what I have. It's going to happen, again, variations in flour, variations in yeast, variation in temperature, humidity. What you're looking for is that size differential. So if it takes you a little bit longer, don't worry about it. This is usually the kind of dish that I make on the weekend where we got time. You don't need to be here babysitting it. So what I do is when I make my dough, I'll usually be out doing something else. And then this is something that I can always come back to. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to start with a little spatula. I'm just going to loosen the sides of the dough and then take it and put it onto my sheet pans here. Now before I do, I'm just going to put a little bit of olive oil on the bottom of my sheet pans. This is about maybe 4 or 5 tablespoons of olive oil. And really what I want to do is make sure that this doesn't stick and it releases when it's done, but I also want the base of the pizza to be nice and crispy. So what I'm going to do is, again, with my impeccably clean hands, I'm just going to rub the olive oil along the base of my sheet pan here. Flip it over to the other side. And this is going to give me a little bit of insurance so that when my pizza's done, it should release from the pan without too much of a fight. And what I'm also going to do is, once I bake this in the oven, as the pizza's done or nearing the point where it's done, I'm simply going to pop the pizza out of the pan. I'm just going to put it on the bars and allow it to bake and crisp up for about 3 or 4 minutes. And that way it's going to ensure that the base of my pizza is very, very crispy and uniformly crispy across the entire surface. So there we are. We have our pans well greased. Just gonna give my dough a little feel. It's absolutely spectacular dough. So with a rubber spatula, I'm just gonna loosen right along the edge here. Make sure that this will come out of my bowl easily, and don't worry if it deflates a little bit. We're gonna give this an opportunity to rise for a second time in the pan. So I'm just gonna take this out and lay it again top side up in my pan. We're going to do the same thing for this guy here. Just go right around the edges. Make sure that it's going to release easily. Just there we are. And we're going to put it right in our pan. So now what I want to do is be delicate with this dough. There's a lot of air in here. Some of that air will get released as we stretch the dough and move it around, but I want to keep as much of that as possible. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to go underneath and maybe give it a quick stretch. There we are. And now I'm just going to work it with my fingertips, and because I have a little bit of oil on my hands, we're just going to work this and stretch it so that it fits the sheet pan that we're working in. Our dough is nicely relaxed. Now keep in mind, there are times when it may fit the pan perfectly, other times where it may be a hair smaller. Doesn't matter. Again, this is pizza made in the home. This is meant to be rustic. I know it kind of moves around a little bit with that olive oil on the bottom of the pan, but as we work it, it will continue to stretch into the corners. There we are. We have a nice compliant dough. There we are. So I'm going to start on this guy here as well. Stretch him out a little bit. There we are. And just with our fingertips, we're going to work that into the shape of our pan. Now, once you have your dough stretched out into the shape of the pan, and I'm going to keep working this so that I work this into the corners, we can get this completely dressed with our toppings and into the oven, and there's absolutely no issue with that. Now, what I like to do is give this a second rise in the pan. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to work this into the corners again with my fingertips, and just make sure that I can get this to the size and thickness that I'm looking for, and then I'm going to give this a second rise in the pan for about an hour, because I like a little bit more lift in my crust. Certainly when it comes to this type of pizza, this is more of a rustic homemade pizza, so I do like a slightly thicker, chewier crust, nice crispy base on the bottom, and then I've got my toppings on top. So I'm going to give this a second rise for about an hour in the pan, and I'd say probably 35-40 minutes from now I will come back, and as this is continuing its rise, I'm going to start to get all of my toppings ready. So I'll certainly rejoin you at that point. But like I said, you can certainly sauce this, dress this, throw it in the oven, and bake it as is at this point. But if you want a slightly fluffier, slightly more interesting crust, in my opinion, I'm going to give this another hour rise in the pan. So I will see you in about 45 minutes. And we are back. It has been just under an hour, and as you can see, our dough has undertaken its second rise, so it's starting to get a little bit poofier, which means that there's a little bit more air in the dough. So we're gonna get a little bit bigger rise, a little bit chewier dough, but bigger holes in terms of the cell structure of the dough. So we're gonna have, some pockets that are have a little bit more of an air pocket in them, other ones that are a little bit denser, but all in all, we're gonna have a much more interesting texture of the dough, in my opinion. So we've got our two doughs that are beautifully relaxed. They've been resting here for about an hour. Now we're gonna get all of our toppings ready to go. So first things first, we've got our vegetables. We've got our bowl here and our cutting board. What we're gonna do is we're gonna cut a few vegetables. We're gonna dice them all up, mix them all up, so we have a mix of vegetables that we can just toss onto our pizza. So it's gonna be quite easy doing that. I've got one big yellow onion here, and I'm just gonna slice. And we'll give this guy just a pretty coarse dice. Again, this is all home cooking. It's meant to be quite rustic. So we're gonna give this. Let's see. We don't want it too fine. We want it to cook in the oven and soften, so we want, almost a medium dice. So as we dice this onion up, it'll be the first of our medley of vegetables. There we are. I got this guy here as well. Second half. There we go. Now, pizza is one of those things, like anything else. It can be greasy and unhealthy, or it can be very, very healthy, depending on how you make it and what you put into it. Our dough, people ask me all the time, why don't you buy that pre-made dough? They've got those pizza bases in the supermarket. Read the ingredients, that's why. Here we have a dough that literally has 4 ingredients made in the traditional method: flour, water, salt, and yeast. No preservatives, no stabilizers, no dough relaxers, no artificial colors, nothing. It's all exactly as God intended. There we are. So we've got our bell pepper, simple box cut. Guy off to the side, and these guys here as well. Little matchsticks, turn them over, and just a medium dice. There we are. Now on our pizza today, we're going to have a fair bit of vegetable. We are going to have a little bit of assorted meat, all stuff that I've had kicking around the fridge. I'm going to use this as an opportunity to clean up any stragglers that I have sitting in the fridge. There we are. Make sure we tuck those fingers away. We've got some fresh mozzarella as well. And we're going to be making a very, very simple tomato sauce to go on our pizza as well. There we are. All right. Let's get our peppers in the bowl as well. We do have a chili pepper here too. Why not? I'll make this guy a little spicy. Now, if we happen to have some leftover vegetables, just throw them in a Tupperware or any kind of resealable container. Throw it in the fridge. Anytime during the week where you want a quick omelet, fry up the rest of these vegetables, toss in a couple of eggs, and you've got yourself a quick omelet ready to go. We've got our zucchini here. We're just going to cut this in 4. And then we're going to give this just a quick dice. And like I was saying, pizza is all a function of, you know, the quality and how healthy the ingredients are that go on it. Here we have, you know, homemade dough. We've got high quality artisanal cheese and assorted meat. We've got some great vegetables, an assortment of vegetables that we're putting on here as well. So the more colorful the assortment of vegetables, the healthier it's going to be for you. There we are. So our second zucchini. And then we've got a handful of mushrooms as well. There we are. Throw these guys in. I've got my oven preheating to 500 degrees. And I've got my racks staggered, one in the middle of the oven, one a little bit higher. So we'll give our mushrooms a quick slice here. This is all stuff that I had just lying around the fridge. It's a great way to use up vegetables. And a great way to get some extra vegetables into your diet. There we are. So we'll get these into the bowl as well. There we are. And now all we're going to do is give this a quick mix. Make sure all of these mushrooms are separated here. And we'll just go right in there and give everything a quick mix. That way, when we sprinkle it onto our pizza, we get a little bit of everything. There we are. All right. Perfect. There we are. Absolutely perfect. So now what we're going to do is we are going to get our tomatoes ready. Just going to get this plate out of the way. I've got myself a bowl. Now this is just a can of good quality plum tomatoes. Brand isn't important. Just find yourself a brand that you like. We want to make sure that we get all those tomatoes into the bowl. Now I could run this through a food mill if I really wanted to get a very, very smooth sauce. But in the event that you don't have a food mill, you could run this through a food processor. In the event that you don't have a food processor, it is still no reason not to make pizza, because you've got all the tools that you need attached to your body. Let me tell you, your hands are the best tool for this. So we'll just toss this here off to the side. What I'm going to do is take a couple of cloves of garlic. I'm just gonna run that over a microplane grater here. These are very, very small cloves, so I'm using 2, otherwise I would just use 1. We don't want to overpower our beautifully ripe tomatoes here. We just want a little hum of garlic in the background. There we are. There we are. What we have here is essentially a nice puree of garlic. Now what we're going to do is we're going to add a little bit of salt to this. There we are. And we're going to add 1 teaspoon of sugar. I find sometimes these tomatoes in the tin are a little bit acidic, so that 1 teaspoon rather of sugar is just enough to cut the acidity. And then what we're going to do is we're going to get right in there with our impeccably clean hands. And all we want to do is just crush those tomatoes. Don't be going all caveman-like, all medieval on these tomatoes. You're going to get a squirt right between the eyes. You want to go in there nice and easy, break these up, and make sure that we have no big pieces behind. So just break these up into a very, very rustic tomato sauce. Like I said, if you've got other tools in the kitchen that could puree these, have at it. In the event that you don't, not a problem. We're gonna go old school and get right in there with our hands and just crush those tomatoes delicately so that they're not squirting back at you. There we are. Now this sauce is almost done. Not quite. Just gonna put my ladle off to the side here. Give my hands another wash. There we are. Now what we're going to use to add some additional flavor is just some basil leaves that I have washed. I've just picked off my plant here behind me. Just going to put these on the board. And now what I'm going to do is very, very coarsely put a knife through these just to start to release the flavor of the basil. You don't want a big honking piece of basil under your teeth, so you just want to run the knife very, very coarsely through these, and we'll start to get, there we are, all of the juices from the basil starting to run, and we're going to put that right into our tomato sauce. In the event that you don't have fresh basil, not a problem. You could certainly use dry basil, a little bit of dry oregano. Either one will work just as well. Now what we're going to do is give this, there we are, just a quick stir. There we are. And now we're going to give this sauce a taste. Absolutely fantastic. So this is now ready to go on our pizza. I'm just going to give this a quick wipe down, and I'll be right back in 2 minutes. And we are back. It is now assembly time. So a quick rundown of what we have. We've got our dough beautifully rested, ready to go. We've got our beautiful tomato sauce that we've just made. We've got a selection of meat. This is prosciutto cotto. This is the Italian version of your typical ham, really, for lack of a better term. If you can't find prosciutto cotto, feel free to use or substitute a good quality cooked ham, either a Black Forest ham or even a rosemary scented ham. But any good quality ham will do. As I was cleaning out the fridge, I found a little bit of prosciutto di Parma that I had left over, as well as some calabrese soppressata. This is a little bit spicy, which for me is not an issue. We've got 3 little balls of fresh mozzarella here that we're going to divide among these 2 pizzas, and then we've got our vegetable mixture. So the most important thing is we don't want to overload the pizza. Right? We don't want to have our pizza crust and then we have an inch of toppings. That's the easiest way for the pizza to stay soggy. So we want to make sure that our crust has an opportunity to crisp up. We're not going to over sauce this. So we're just going to make sure our sauce is well mixed. We're going to give this a couple of ladles on each of our pizza crusts here, and then we're just gonna smooth that around. There we are. That should be enough. There we are. So let's start just with the base of the ladle to move that around. We don't want to be too physical with our dough here. It's just about done its second rise, so we want to keep all of those bubbles, all of that air in the dough as best we can. There we are. And that is just about what I'm looking for. Perfect. So we'll get this guy done here as well. Just smooth this out with the base of the ladle. There we are. Oh, the smell of that basil is absolutely stunning. There we go. So, a light base of our tomato sauce. There we are. Now we're going to put a layer of our prosciutto cotto. And of course, this guy is not going to cooperate. So if he's not going to cooperate, we will just put down, there we are, a few strips on the base of the pizza. Again, this is sliced very, very thin. There we go. Grab a couple more slices here. We're going to try and get this placed as thinly as possible. Some of these guys just, when they package them, they just put a little too much weight on them and they stick together, no problem. We will shred these to make sure that we get a very, very light coating on our pizza. There we are. We'll go on to our other one. And then what I'll do is I'll put some prosciutto di Parma on one of these pizzas, and I'll put some of the soppressata on our second pizza. We just want to drape this over one very, very thin layer. There we are. There we are. A little bit here, a little bit there. Done. So what we will do now is we will take our prosciutto di Parma and we will just layer this down very, very gingerly. There. There we are. This one we will divide so that we make sure we get a little bit of coverage in the corners as well. There we are. On our second pizza here, we'll just take a few slices of this beautiful soppressata. There we go. Beautiful. Beautiful. So we are done with our meat. We'll just put this off to the side. Now what we'll do is we'll take our vegetables and we will just go in there with our hands and make sure that we get a nice even coverage. We don't need to salt our vegetables. That prosciutto di Parma and the soppressata has a little bit of salt. So we don't need to be salting our vegetables because there will be a little bit of salt that leaches out of the meat as we're cooking. And there we are. A little bit more around the edges here. There we are. Second pizza. There we are. bed of vegetables. All right, and now what we'll do is we will get our cheese here, and there's a fair bit of moisture in this cheese, so we just want to rip it and put little dollops right along the top here. Again, we're not trying to overcrowd this pizza. After all, we want to taste that crust that we put all that work into. There we are. Take our second one here. There we are. And our last one. There we are. Now that is gorgeous. And that one's got enough. Just put a couple of pieces here. And there we are. We're going to give our hands a quick wash. Let me tell you, that smells absolutely incredible. And we haven't even baked that yet. So I'm going to put this in the oven. This will take, I'd say, between 20 and 25 minutes to bake. What I'm going to do is I'm going to put one top shelf, one middle shelf. About halfway through, I'm going to rotate them and flip them. So that way they're going to cook evenly. And then when this comes out, we will have a crispy base pizza, beautiful toppings. I will see you in about 25 minutes. All right, we are back. It has been about 25 minutes. Now, I've been baking my pizza at between 5 and 550 degrees, but I just have a conventional gas oven, no convection. If you do have convection, you might want to back off on that heat a little bit. Convection, with that convection fan, tends to speed up the cooking process. So you might want to cook it at about 450 with convection, and that should be plenty. But in my oven, about 500, between 500 and 550 degrees is about the max that my oven goes. And this is one of the pizzas that I've just taken out. Now I've got my other one where I've taken it out of the pan and I've put it on the oven bars just to crisp up that base a little bit more. This is the pizza that's going to go in the fridge, and we're going to reheat this one at some point during the week, maybe for lunches or leftovers. But look at this pizza. Look at the character of the crust. It's crispy, it's thick, it's puffy, and I mean, someone served this to me, I would not at all be disappointed. This is an absolutely gorgeous pizza. So we are now going to take our other pizza out of the oven. It's been in the oven for about 2 or 3 minutes just to crisp up that base. This is the pizza with the hot calabrese soppressata. The other one is with the prosciutto di Parma and the prosciutto cotto. This is not your thin crust, cracker crust pizza. This is not your Neapolitan pizza that's made in a wood oven. This is what the Italians call la pizza fatto in casa, pizza made in the home. And every family, I guarantee you, has their own recipe as to how they make their pizza. This is an absolutely dynamite recipe, but feel free to alter this. Put whatever toppings you like. Anything that you have kicking around your fridge, you can obviously substitute. But the point here is, this is a celebration of the crust. We don't want to overload this with toppings. We don't want to overload this with cheese. We want to keep it healthy, and we want to keep it really to a point where we can enjoy that crust. So we're going to take our last pizza out of the oven. Just going to shut the oven off. Look at that. Absolutely stunning. Absolutely stunning. Oh, and the underside is beautifully brown. It's beautifully crisp. We're going to get this off our peel, and we are just going to cut right into this. Now look at this. The crust is beautifully crunchy. It's risen. This is absolutely stunning. So we are just going to cut this in 4. Oh, can you hear that? Can you hear that? Oh, just look at that. Look at that. Absolutely gorgeous. Oh, absolutely. Well, you know what? Just so that it's a little easier to eat, we are going to cut this in half, and we are going to put these 2 pieces onto the plate. Absolutely gorgeous. Oh, look at that. Look at that. The crust has gorgeous texture. Oh, beautiful cell structure. It's beautifully crunchy. Now that is a pizza to be proud of. It's a little hot, so I'm not going to dive right in there quite yet to take a bite, but let me tell you, I've made this pizza countless times. It never fails to impress. It's absolutely spectacular. I hope you try this. Yes, it's got a few steps to it, but overall you can be doing other things throughout the course of the day. There's really only maybe half an hour worth of stuff that you're going to be doing to this pizza in its preparation, from the creation of the dough to preparing the toppings to baking it. Now we get to enjoy the fruits of our labor. I hope you make this. It's absolutely dynamite. This is Coach Joe. I will see you on the next one.